The people who judge the fastest are often the ones least prepared for what comes next. The Whitmore Grand Ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers that scattered golden light across polished marble floors. Wealth filled the room. Influence filled the room. Confidence filled the room. Men in tailored suits exchanged business cards. Women in designer gowns laughed beside tables decorated with fresh white orchids. At the center of it all stood a magnificent black, grand piano beneath a spotlight. It was more than an instrument. It was a symbol, a centerpiece, a statement. Emily Carter balanced a silver serving tray against her hip as she moved quietly through the crowd. Her black waitress uniform was immaculate despite a 12-hour shift, and her apron was neatly pressed. Most guests barely noticed her. That was normal. People tended to look through waitresses instead of at them. 5-year-old Noah sat near the back of the ballroom on a velvet bench, his small hands folded in his lap. While other children might have been distracted by desserts or decorations, Noah kept looking at the piano. Again and again. Emily noticed. She always noticed. A soft smile touched her face before she continued serving drinks. Across the room, billionaire Jonathan Reed listened to a donor explain a new investment proposal. He nodded politely, but his attention drifted. Something about the little boy near the piano had caught his eye. The child seemed completely absorbed by the instrument. Not excited. Not curious. Focused. Jonathan found that unusual. Then the atmosphere changed. Vanessa Sinclair entered the ballroom. Jonathan's fiancée moved confidently through the crowd, dressed in an elegant silver evening gown that attracted immediate attention. People greeted her with admiration. She accepted it effortlessly. Vanessa valued appearances. Tonight's gala had to be perfect. As she approached the center of the ballroom, her eyes followed the direction of several guests who appeared distracted. She noticed Noah. Her expression tightened instantly. The child had quietly stepped away from his bench and begun walking toward the piano. The movement was innocent, unremarkable. Yet Vanessa reacted as though she had witnessed a serious problem. "Excuse me," she said sharply. Nearby conversation slowed. Noah stopped and looked up. Vanessa pointed directly at him. "Keep that child away from my piano." Her voice echoed farther than she intended. Silence spread through the ballroom. Heads turned. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Emily froze where she stood. Noah remained motionless. Jonathan looked up immediately. The donor beside him stopped speaking. Every eye in the room shifted toward the small boy standing beneath the spotlight. Emily set down her tray and calmly walked toward her son. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply took Noah's hand. Vanessa folded her arms. The judgment on her face was impossible to miss. "This is a formal event," she continued. "Not a playground." A few guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Others looked away. Jonathan studied Emily carefully. Most people would have reacted defensively. Most people would have explained themselves. Emily did neither. She simply looked at Noah. And Noah looked at the piano. Then, with a quiet determination that nobody expected from a 5-year-old child, he took a single step forward. Emily's hand tightened gently around Noah's fingers as the silence continued to spread across the ballroom. The little boy stopped walking, but his eyes never left the grand piano. Around them, conversations had completely disappeared. Guests who had been discussing investments, charity auctions, and business partnerships now watched a waitress and her son as though they had become the most important people in the room. Vanessa seemed satisfied by the attention. Her posture relaxed slightly as she adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist. To her, the situation was simple. Certain places belonged to certain people. Certain rules existed for a reason. And a child standing near a piano worth more than many family homes did not belong in her vision of a perfect evening. Emily lowered her eyes briefly. She had encountered people like Vanessa before. People who measured worth by appearance. People who assumed they knew someone's story after a single glance. Years earlier, those moments had hurt. Tonight, they felt different. Perhaps because Noah was beside her. Perhaps because she had learned that arguing rarely changed minds. Across the ballroom, Jonathan Reed found himself studying Emily instead of Vanessa. The calmness in her face puzzled him. He had built companies by observing people. Pressure usually revealed character. Yet Emily seemed untouched by the judgment surrounding her. Not because she was unaware of it, because she refused to let it define her. That interested him. Nearby, Noah looked up at his mother. "Can I see it?" he asked softly. The question was innocent, almost whispered. Emily smiled faintly. Before she could answer, Vanessa laughed. The sound carried farther than she intended. "The piano is not a toy," she said. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Jonathan frowned. Something about the comment felt unnecessary. Noah simply nodded. There was no anger in his expression, no embarrassment, just disappointment. Then something unexpected happened. Emily reached into the pocket of her apron. Her fingers brushed against a folded piece of paper. The edges were worn from years of careful handling. She did not remove it. She merely touched it for a moment. A habit, a memory, a source of strength. Jonathan noticed. He wondered what could be important enough for a waitress to carry it everywhere. Noah noticed the gesture too. His expression softened immediately. The disappointment vanished. It was replaced by quiet determination, the kind children rarely possessed. The ballroom lights reflected in his eyes as he looked back toward the piano. Near the stage, several musicians who had performed earlier were packing away equipment. One elderly man paused while placing sheet music into a leather case. His attention had settled on Noah. There was something about the child's focus that caught him off guard. Most children admired a piano because it looked impressive. This boy looked at it as though he missed it. The distinction was small, yet impossible to ignore. Emily took a slow breath. The evening was supposed to be simple. Finish her shift. Earn enough money to cover next week's expenses. Take Noah home. Instead, every eye in the ballroom seemed fixed on them. Then Jonathan made a decision. He stepped away from the group of donors surrounding him and began walking toward the center of the room. Guests instinctively moved aside. Vanessa noticed immediately. Her confident smile faded slightly. Because for the first time that evening, Jonathan was no longer looking at her. He was looking at Emily and Noah. Jonathan Reed stopped a few feet away from Emily and Noah. The crowd immediately noticed. People paid attention when billionaires moved with purpose. Conversations that had briefly returned disappeared again. Vanessa watched carefully, expecting Jonathan to support her position. Instead, he looked directly at Noah. "Do you like music?" he asked. His voice was calm, respectful. Noah nodded. "Yes, sir." Jonathan glanced toward the piano. "That much." Noah followed his gaze. The enormous black instrument reflected the chandelier light like polished glass. The boy smiled softly. More than that. A few guests exchanged curious looks. The answer sounded too thoughtful for a child his age. Jonathan almost smiled. Emily noticed the reaction. For the first time all evening, someone seemed interested in understanding her son instead of judging him. Vanessa folded her arms tighter. She disliked where the conversation was going. "Jonathan, this is unnecessary," she said. "We have donors waiting." He did not immediately respond. Instead, his attention shifted briefly to the folded paper hidden inside Emily's apron pocket. He had noticed her touch it twice already. Whatever it was, it clearly mattered. "Long night?" he asked Emily. The question surprised her. "Yes," she answered honestly. "Very long." Jonathan nodded. He recognized exhaustion when he saw it. Not the exhaustion of one difficult day, the deeper kind. The kind carried by people who shouldered responsibilities alone. Nearby, the elderly musician who had been packing his belongings continued observing the scene. His eyes moved between Noah and the piano. Something about the child seemed familiar, though he could not explain why. It was not the boy's face. It was the way he looked at the instrument, like someone greeting an old friend. Vanessa stepped forward. Her patience was fading. "The event schedule is already behind," she said. "Can we please move on?" Several guests looked uncomfortable. Others seemed increasingly interested. The tension had become impossible to ignore. Noah remained quiet. He was not paying attention to the adults anymore. His eyes stayed fixed on the piano. Emily followed his gaze. She knew exactly what he was thinking. She had seen that look hundreds of times. At home, at community centers, through store windows whenever they passed a music shop. It was never about attention. It was always about the music itself. Her fingers slipped into her apron pocket once more. This time she felt the folded paper more clearly. The worn edges, the familiar creases. Memories rushed back. A small apartment, late nights, laughter, piano keys, promises. She quickly pushed the memories aside. This was not the time. Across the ballroom, Jonathan noticed something else. Noah had not once looked intimidated by the crowd. Hundreds of strangers surrounded him. Some had judged him openly. Yet the boy seemed completely unaffected. Jonathan found that remarkable. Most adults would have struggled under that pressure. Then the elderly musician suddenly stopped packing altogether. His attention sharpened. Noah had taken another small step toward the piano. Not a reckless step, not a rebellious one. A deliberate step, the kind taken by someone moving toward something important. The room grew quiet again. Emily felt her heart begin to beat faster. Vanessa opened her mouth, preparing another objection. But before she could speak, Noah looked up at his mother. His blue eyes were calm. Certain. Mom, he asked softly, can I play just one note? Emily looked down at her son. For a moment, the ballroom disappeared. The chandeliers, the guests, the judgment, the whispers, all of it faded behind a simple question from a 5-year-old boy. Can I play just one note? Noah's eyes held no defiance. No desire to prove anyone wrong. Only hope. Quiet hope. Emily felt the folded paper inside her apron pocket once again. The familiar edges pressed against her fingertips. She remembered another pair of hands resting on piano keys years ago. Another gentle voice speaking about music as though it were something alive. Her heart tightened. Then she nodded, very slightly. Noah smiled. It was a small smile, almost invisible. Yet Jonathan Reed noticed it immediately. So did the elderly musician standing near the stage. Vanessa noticed as well, and her expression hardened. Absolutely not, she said. Her voice cut through the room. This has already gone too far. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Jonathan slowly turned toward her. It is one note, he said calmly. Vanessa looked surprised. That is not the point. Jonathan studied her for a moment. Then he glanced back toward Noah. Perhaps it is. The silence deepened. Nobody wanted to interrupt whatever was unfolding. Noah carefully approached the piano. His small dress shoes barely made a sound against the polished floor. The giant black instrument seemed even larger now that he stood beside it. Some guests exchanged doubtful looks. Others watched with growing curiosity. Emily remained where she was. She did not rush after him. She did not stop him. That alone intrigued Jonathan. Trust like that was rare. Near the stage, the elderly musician slowly removed his glasses. He could not explain why his pulse had begun to quicken. Something felt familiar. Important. Noah reached the piano bench and placed one hand on its edge. The spotlight above reflected across the polished surface. His reflection stared back at him. For a brief second, he closed his eyes. Emily noticed. Her breath caught. She had seen him do that before every practice session. It was his way of listening before he played. Vanessa laughed softly under her breath. This is ridiculous. Yet nobody joined her. Not this time. The room had changed. People who had once ignored Emily and Noah now seemed unable to look away. Jonathan folded his arms and watched carefully. He had attended countless galas, hundreds of speeches, thousands of meetings. Yet somehow this felt more significant than any business deal discussed that evening. Noah climbed onto the piano bench. His feet dangled above the floor. The instrument towered around him. He looked impossibly small. The ballroom became completely silent. Even the servers had stopped moving. Emily felt her heartbeat echo in her ears. The folded paper remained in her pocket. The memory remained in her heart. Noah gently lifted his right hand. One finger hovered above the keys. The elderly musician suddenly took a step forward. Jonathan noticed. Vanessa did not. Every eye in the room followed the movement of that tiny hand. Then Noah lowered his finger and touched a single key. One note floated into the ballroom. Clear, pure, perfect. And the elderly musician's face instantly changed. The note lingered beneath the chandeliers long after the key had risen. It was only a single note. Yet something about it seemed to reach every corner of the ballroom. The elderly musician stood completely still. His eyes widened behind his glasses. Around him, guests looked confused. Most of them had heard thousands of piano notes throughout their lives. They could not understand why one simple sound had transformed the expression on his face. Jonathan noticed immediately. The reaction was too strong to ignore. Vanessa noticed as well, though irritation still clouded her judgment. It was one note, she said quietly. Nothing more. But the elderly musician was no longer listening. His attention remained fixed on Noah. The little boy sat on the piano bench with the same calm expression he had worn from the beginning. He was not looking at the crowd. He was not waiting for approval. He was simply looking at the keyboard. The elderly musician slowly stepped closer. Play another, he said. His voice carried softly through the silent room. Emily felt her heart skip. She recognized that tone. It was not curiosity. It was recognition. Noah glanced toward his mother. Emily gave the smallest nod. Once again, she trusted him. Jonathan watched the exchange carefully. The trust between them fascinated him. It was quiet, unspoken, absolute. Noah lowered his fingers onto the keys. This time, more than one note emerged. A simple melody drifted through the ballroom. Gentle, elegant, unhurried. The guests grew still. A few moments earlier, they had been watching out of curiosity. Now they were listening, truly listening. The melody continued. One phrase flowed naturally into the next. There was nothing flashy about it. No attempt to impress. Yet the music carried a strange emotional weight. Emily felt memories rising inside her. Late evenings in a small apartment. A lamp glowing beside a piano. Laughter. Music drifting through open windows. The folded paper in her apron pocket suddenly felt heavier than ever. Near the front of the room, the elderly musician removed his glasses completely. His eyes never left Noah's hands. Jonathan stepped beside him. "Do you know that piece?" he asked quietly. The man did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched another phrase unfold. Then another. Finally, he whispered, "No." Jonathan looked surprised. The elderly musician swallowed slowly. "That is the problem." Jonathan frowned. "What do you mean?" The man pointed toward the piano. "I do not know it. Yet it sounds familiar." The melody expanded. Guests who had been standing near the exits drifted closer. Servers stopped moving between tables. Conversations disappeared entirely. Even Vanessa had fallen silent. Noah continued playing. His small feet still dangled above the floor. His face remained calm. Yet the music seemed far older than he was. Far deeper. Emily felt tears gathering in her eyes. Not because Noah was playing beautifully. She had heard him play before. It was because she recognized fragments hidden within the melody. Fragments she had not heard in years. Fragments she thought had been lost forever. Then Noah moved into a new passage. The elderly musician suddenly inhaled sharply. His hand trembled. Jonathan turned toward him. The man's eyes were filled with disbelief. Because he had just realized something that would change the entire evening. The elderly musician could barely take his eyes off Noah. The melody continued to flow through the ballroom, each phrase deepening the silence around it. Guests who had arrived expecting an evening of speeches and networking now stood completely still, captivated by a child they had barely noticed an hour earlier. Jonathan watched the older man's reaction carefully. He had seen admiration before. He had seen surprise. What he saw now was something different. Recognition. The kind that reached beyond memory and into emotion. Noah moved effortlessly through another section of the piece. His small fingers traveled across the keys with a natural ease that seemed impossible for someone his age. Yet there was no showmanship in his playing. No attempt to impress. The music felt personal, intimate, as though he were remembering something rather than performing it. Emily felt tears threatening to surface again. She remembered the first time Noah had played this melody at home. He had been sitting at an old, upright piano in a community music center. Halfway through the piece, she had frozen. Certain passages sounded hauntingly familiar. Fragments of ideas she had once heard years ago. Fragments that belonged to someone she had loved. Near the stage, the elderly musician finally spoke. "My name is Arthur Langley," he said quietly. Several guests immediately recognized the name. Arthur had spent decades conducting orchestras across the country. His reputation carried weight. Yet his voice trembled slightly now. "I knew a composer many years ago." Jonathan listened. So did everyone else. Arthur looked at Emily. A brilliant young man with extraordinary instincts. Emily's heart tightened. She already knew where this was going. Arthur continued watching Noah play. He used to build melodies exactly like this. Simple beginnings. Unexpected turns. Deep emotion hidden beneath restraint. Vanessa remained silent. For the first time all evening, she seemed uncertain of everything. The confidence that had defined her earlier had begun to disappear. Noah reached another passage. Arthur's eyes widened. "There," he whispered. "That phrase." He shook his head slowly. "I have heard something like that before." Emily lowered her gaze. Her fingers slipped into her apron pocket once more. This time she removed the folded sheet of paper. The worn manuscript rested carefully in her hands. Jonathan noticed immediately. Arthur noticed too. His expression changed. Emily stared at the paper for a long moment before stepping forward. The ballroom remained silent except for the music. When she reached Arthur, she held out the manuscript. He accepted it carefully. almost reverently. The paper looked old, creased, protected, loved. Arthur unfolded it. His eyes scanned the handwritten notes. Then his breathing stopped for a moment. Jonathan saw the color leave his face. Arthur looked from the manuscript to Noah, then back to the manuscript. His hands began to tremble. "This cannot be," he whispered. Emily closed her eyes briefly. She had not shown that paper to anyone in years. Arthur looked up at her. There was disbelief in his eyes now. Disbelief and emotion. "Where did you get this?" he asked softly. Emily opened her eyes and looked toward Noah. The music continued beneath the chandeliers. Then she answered with the words that would change everything. "It belonged to my husband." Arthur Langley stared at Emily as though the entire ballroom had suddenly shifted beneath his feet. Around them, Noah continued playing. The melody floated through the room with the same quiet confidence, unaware that every note was changing the course of the evening. Arthur looked down at the manuscript again. His eyes moved across the faded handwriting. Then he closed them briefly. When he opened them, they were filled with memories. "Your husband," he repeated softly. "What was his name?" Emily hesitated. Speaking his name in public still felt strangely personal. Then she answered, "Michael Carter." Arthur inhaled sharply. Several guests looked at one another, confused by the reaction. Jonathan noticed it immediately. Vanessa noticed it too. Arthur slowly lowered the manuscript. "I knew Michael." The words spread through the ballroom like a ripple across still water. Emily felt her heart stop for a moment. Very few people knew that part of her past. Very few people even knew Michael's name. Arthur took another step forward. 20 years ago, music schools talked about him constantly. Concert halls wanted him. Producers wanted him. Critics believed he would become one of the most influential composers of his generation. Jonathan's expression changed. He looked at Emily with new curiosity. Nothing about her life as a waitress suggested a connection to someone like that. Arthur smiled sadly, and then he disappeared. Emily lowered her eyes. She remembered exactly why. She remembered Michael choosing a quieter life, choosing family, choosing love over fame. Some people never understood that decision. Michael never regretted it. Noah moved into another section of the melody. Arthur listened carefully. His expression softened. "This piece," he whispered. "I remember hearing fragments of it years ago." Emily felt emotion rise in her chest. She had not expected anyone else to remember. Arthur turned another page of the manuscript. The final measures ended abruptly. The composition simply stopped, unfinished. Yet Noah's music did not stop. He continued beyond the written notes. The melody evolved naturally, flowing into phrases that existed nowhere on the page. Jonathan looked from the manuscript to the piano. "Wait," he said quietly. "Those notes are not written there." Arthur nodded slowly. The realization had already struck him. Vanessa frowned. For the first time all evening, uncertainty had completely replaced confidence. Arthur's eyes returned to Noah. The boy's hands moved gently across the keys. Every phrase sounded connected. Every transition felt inevitable, as though the music had always been waiting to be completed. Arthur shook his head in disbelief. "The ending," he whispered. "Michael never finished the ending." Emily swallowed hard. She had carried that unfinished manuscript for years. Noah reached the final section of his performance. The room remained silent. No glasses clinked. No conversations resumed. Hundreds of people listened as though afraid to breathe. Then Arthur looked directly at Emily. His voice trembled. "You never taught him this ending, did you?" Emily's eyes filled with tears. Slowly, she shook her head. Arthur turned back toward the piano. Wonder spread across his face. Because the little boy everyone had dismissed only an hour earlier was playing a conclusion that had never existed on paper. And as the final passage approached, Arthur realized that Noah was about to reveal something no one in that ballroom would ever forget. The final section of the melody unfolded beneath the chandeliers with a quiet beauty that seemed to suspend time itself. Noah's fingers moved gently across the keys, guiding the unfinished composition toward a destination that no one in the ballroom had ever seen written on paper. Arthur Langley stood motionless beside the piano. The manuscript trembled slightly in his hands. Every note deepened his disbelief. Every phrase sounded natural, complete, as though the music had finally found the ending it had been searching for all these years. Jonathan Reed could not take his eyes off the child. He had entered the evening expecting discussions about investments, philanthropy, and business opportunities. Instead, He was witnessing something that felt far more valuable. Around him, wealthy donors, executives, and socialites remained completely silent. No one checked a phone. No one whispered. No one looked away. Emily stood near the edge of the spotlight with tears gathering in her eyes. She remembered the night Michael first played the unfinished melody for her. They had been sitting in a tiny apartment with barely enough money for rent. Yet he had smiled as though he owned the world. He had promised he would finish the piece someday. Then life had changed. Time had moved forward. Someday never came. Until now. Noah entered the final passage. The music softened. A delicate sequence of notes floated through the ballroom. Arthur closed his eyes. The emotion on his face became impossible to hide. When he opened them again, they were filled with tears. "Michael," he whispered. The name barely left his lips. Yet somehow it carried through the silence. Vanessa heard it. Jonathan heard it. Emily heard it. The melody continued. Then something extraordinary happened. The final phrases resolved every unfinished idea introduced earlier in the composition. Themes that had appeared at the beginning returned transformed. Questions hidden inside the music found answers. The ending felt inevitable, beautiful, complete. Arthur slowly shook his head in amazement. "That is exactly how he would have done it," he whispered. The last chord finally arrived. Warm, gentle, certain. It lingered beneath the golden light before fading into silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The room remained frozen. Noah simply sat at the piano, looking at the keys. He seemed unaware that he had just changed the entire evening. Emily pressed a hand against her heart. Jonathan exhaled slowly. Even Vanessa appeared unable to find words. Then Arthur stepped forward. His voice broke slightly as he addressed the crowd. "You have just witnessed something remarkable." Hundreds of eyes turned toward him. Arthur lifted the manuscript. This composition was never finished. He looked toward Noah. Until tonight. A ripple of emotion moved through the room. Several guests lowered their eyes. Others stared at the little boy in disbelief. Jonathan glanced toward Vanessa. For the first time since the gala had begun, she looked genuinely ashamed. Not because people were watching, because she finally understood what she had failed to see. And standing beneath the spotlight, beside a piano she once wanted him kept away from, Noah Carter had become the most respected person in the room. For several long seconds after the final chord faded away, the ballroom remained completely silent. It was not the uncomfortable silence that had followed Vanessa's criticism earlier that evening. This silence carried something different. Respect. Reflection. All. Noah sat quietly on the piano bench, his small hands resting in his lap. He looked around the room with innocent curiosity, as though he could not understand why hundreds of adults were staring at him. Then the first applause began. Arthur Langley brought his hands together slowly. The sound echoed through the ballroom. One guest joined him, then another. Within moments, the entire room erupted into applause. Men and women who had spent their lives evaluating success through numbers, titles, and status rose to their feet. The standing ovation seemed endless. Emily covered her mouth as tears finally escaped. She had worked double shifts, missed sleep, carried worries she never spoke about. Yet in that moment, none of it mattered. Her son stood beneath the spotlight with quiet dignity, earning something money could never buy. Jonathan Reed joined the applause. His eyes remained fixed on Noah and Emily. The respect he felt was genuine, not because of talent alone, but because of the strength it had taken to reach this moment. Arthur carefully folded the manuscript and returned it to Emily. "Michael would have been proud," he said softly. Emily nodded. Words failed her. Some emotions were too large for language. Then Jonathan stepped forward. The applause gradually faded. Guests watched closely. They sensed something important was about to happen. Jonathan stopped beside Emily. "Tonight was supposed to celebrate generosity," he said. "Instead, it taught us humility." The room listened. Jonathan looked toward Noah. "Your son reminded every person here that greatness does not announce itself." His gaze shifted briefly across the crowd. "Sometimes it arrives quietly and waits for someone willing to see it." Several guests lowered their eyes. The lesson felt personal now. Jonathan turned back toward Emily. "I would like to sponsor the first public performance of Michael Carter's completed composition." A ripple of surprise moved through the ballroom. Arthur smiled immediately. Emily stood speechless. Jonathan continued. "And every dollar raised from that performance will support music education programs for children who might otherwise never have the opportunity to be heard." The applause returned even louder than before. Then something unexpected happened. Vanessa stepped forward. The confidence that had once defined her was gone. She looked at Emily first, then at Noah. For a moment, she struggled to find the right words. Finally, she spoke. "I was wrong." The ballroom fell quiet again. Vanessa lowered her eyes. "I judged someone without knowing anything about them." She looked at Noah. "I am sorry." Noah simply smiled. It was the same gentle smile he had worn all evening. Emily placed a hand on his shoulder. There was no anger in her expression, no desire to embarrass anyone, only grace. As the gala slowly came to an end, guests approached Emily and Noah with admiration instead of assumptions. Outside, the lights of Manhattan shimmered beneath the night sky. Emily and Noah stepped through the hotel doors together. Behind them, the applause had faded. The music had ended. But something far more important remained. Because the people who had entered the ballroom believing they could recognize value at a glance left with a different understanding. The quietest person in the room had changed every heart without raising his voice. And sometimes the greatest gift a person can offer the world is simply the courage to be exactly who they are.